Good evening and welcome to BronxTalk. It came 3 weeks after the April 1st deadline, but the governor and state legislature finally agreed on their annual budget. It includes provisions for housing, criminal justice, further cannabis reform, and much more. Also, you might be surprised about some items that were not in the budget this time around. We will review all of that this evening with the Assembly member from the 84th District, which includes the Bronx neighborhoods of Mott Haven, Hunts Point, Port Morris, Concourse Village, and Highbridge. Welcome back to BronxTalk, Assembly member Amanda Septimo.
Thank you so much, Gary. It's always great to be here.
Nice to have you. And I realized just beforehand, and I mentioned to you, you've been here right after the budget each year for the last 3 years.
It's my stop. It's my pit stop I've got to make now.
I guess so. Let's just do a little history. In the past, the April 1st deadline, and people were like, oh goodness, they can't get the budget done in time, it's late. This year I felt like everybody was like, well, of course it's going to be late, and nobody seemed to care. Is there concern about that in Albany, that it's late? Or really at this point, we know we're going to get it done, we'll get it done in time?
No, we certainly are concerned about getting it done on time, but there are just hairy issues that take time to work through. And also the way the holidays landed this year. Easter was just before the deadline. Right. Actually, I think March 31st was Easter. So holidays made it a little more complicated, and we had thorny issues that we just had to work through.
You expressed to me, we're going to lay it out to the general public when you sat down. You said this was kind of a difficult negotiation and difficult period. Why was it difficult for you?
You know, I mean, I think every year when we're passing the budget, we're dealing with really difficult issues. And we know that the decisions that we make feel far away, but we know that they have impact when we go back home. And in this budget in particular, we decided to tackle a massive issue like housing, massive issues like education, higher education, health, mental health. And so all issues that have impact on a daily in people's lives and that we wanted to make sure we were being responsible on.
The last go-round, the governor proposed 800,000 new homes, and that didn't quite make it through. This year, we did get a budget plan on housing. Let's see, 421A incentive for housing development is expired, and actually expired a couple of years ago. Now there's something called 485X.
Yes.
I don't know, do we want to have you vote up or down, or you want to maybe give the constituents some details about what it means?
Yeah.
And then give us your opinion. Do you like it or you don't like it?
Yeah. I mean, well, so we did a brief extension of 421A as well, just for some of the projects that are already kind of baked and ready to go, though we modified it a little bit so that the highest income band's 130% AMI, which is really what gets to the heart of affordable for who when we hear affordable housing, but it's not really affordable for people in the neighborhoods. We kind of tried to really get at the heart of that issue. In 485X, the new program, it's another incentive program to make it so that, you know, there's opportunity for developers to be able to build in these high cost areas where rent is just reaching $5,000–6,000 for 1- and 2-bedroom apartments, and really make it so that we have enough places for people to live in New York. I think that the program in and of itself is going to incentivize building, and that's good. We need more housing in New York. But I think what's more important about the housing package is that it is in fact a package. We can't just build our way out of our problem here in New York. We have an affordability crisis. In this package, we've increased tenant protections to make it easier for folks to stay in their homes. You have automatic right to lease renewal now when you're a renter, unless there are specific reasons. Your landlord has to offer you a lease renewal. They can't raise your rent more than 10% between leases. And so we really did a lot to try to stabilize the housing market. We also have included a pilot on legalizing basement apartments, which we know exist all over the city, but people are living in them right now, and they're not regulated. And so we see when there's big storms, people's apartments flood. We've heard of tragedies where people are dying because there are just not rules around these
and so
homes.
So those kinds of rules would create regulations that would have to be followed if, in fact, you have an apartment in the basement.
Exactly.
Of your,
exactly.
home.
So it's an opportunity to face the reality that people living in basements, and they deserve to be safe.
Well, is there a gross difference between 421A and 485X that you could say, well, that one's gone, but we did this and this is better? Or, you know, I think it would help constituents to understand what is the difference, what was that and what is this.
So I think the primary difference in these programs is going to be seen in two places. First, again, forcing deeper affordability. Without getting too wonky, again, it's more measures of who is this affordable housing actually for? Who is it affordable for right now? And we've instituted income bands and the different incentives to make it so that it will get to reaching people who live in these communities right now, instead of facilitating displacement, which is what a lot of people saw happen through 421A. So I'd say that's one primary difference. And then the other is this program really incentivizes building in areas that we don't see traditional building happening in. We've seen, for example, in my district in the South Bronx, you see a lot of new housing go up, but nobody who lives there can afford it. And so this is to say, okay, and instead of incentivizing wealthy people to come out to our communities and force displacement of our people, why don't we build more housing in wealthy communities?
And you think this will help incentivize that?
I think so.
You know, the word affordable is fascinating. I just saw two different ads listed in the headline as affordable, and it was like $3,800 for like a, you know, a 2-bedroom apartment, and the other was $4,000.
Yeah.
All in middle and lower middle class Bronx neighborhoods,
Yeah.
$4,000 for like 2 bedrooms.
Yeah.
I don't know. I guess free speech allows people to say whatever they want, but we'd love to get that word affordable off there.
And I'd love it to mean something, right? And I think there are two things that are happening. One, it's not marketed to our community, and that's important. We need to make sure that housing that's built in our community is for our community. But also, one of the things that's happened is that we've really institutionalized what it means to be rent burdened. Definitionally, if you pay 30% of your income, so 1/3 of the money that you make, to your rent, you are rent burdened. But when you look at these affordable housing lotteries, that's the standard. You have to pay 30% of your income.
Sense.
And so that's not right either.
Advocates are concerned that good cause eviction was watered down a little bit. The Housing Justice for All tenants' rights group estimated the governor's version of good cause excluded 2.8 million tenants. That's a lot of people.
Yep.
Of course, across the state, it's the state, and that's not only New York City. But are you concerned that good cause eviction has some loopholes now?
Yes, in fact, I wouldn't call what we passed in the budget good cause. I would say that it's increased tenant protections, and those are important. But I think the good cause bill is a different measure. We've made it so that folks have access to automatic lease renewals, so that there are reasons where that need to be presented if you're to evict someone, and limits on rent increases. But the tenant protections that pass in this budget are simply not good cause.
If a landlord makes improvements to an apartment, they can, and they upgrade a service or to an apartment, they can then increase the rent. That was an interesting thing. From a fairness point of view, that sounds logical. If they invest, then they should be able to get a little bit to pay it back.
Yes, that is certainly true. But I think one of the things that we always have to measure against is that people's homes are so critically important to stability. When you talk about children, when you talk about families and their long-term health, you need to give people the ability to plan for years. When you buy a home, it's a 30-year mortgage. You know, in theory, where you're going to be living for the next 30 years and however long after you choose. And so renters deserve that stability as well. Yes, landlords, if they invest in property, should be able to recoup those investments. But there needs to be a balance. Tenants are not living in these places forever. So once you get a rent increase, does it stay increased? Is that a permanent increase? Why should you pay for that refrigerator when it'll be there long after you're gone? Right. And so those are some of the balances that I think we need to strike.
$2.4 billion went to address the ongoing migrant crisis. I'm assuming you see that as helpful.
Absolutely. In the fall, actually, or earlier in the winter, I'd had a press conference with some groups, Make the Road, other immigrant groups, New York Immigration Coalition, and some of my colleagues calling on the governor to increase her investment because the city is experiencing a moment of growth, and our community is growing, and we need more resources to support our newly arrived neighbors.
Where does that money go?
Well, it will go to New York City. That's a lot of
money. I mean,
yeah.
Where would it go? It goes to new shelters, new homes, potentially?
Well, the city, ultimately, New York City will decide how it's going to allocate that funding, but there's also funding in there for communities outside of New York City. So that if we have newly arrived neighbors who want to go explore opportunities in upstate, there will also be funding for resettlement programs in other parts of the state.
Has the migrant crisis affected your district? Have you heard it from constituents or from migrants who've come to you? What's been the effect?
We definitely have migrants in our district, but they're just like any other newly arrived folks to New York. We're a community of immigrants. We're a community that is constantly welcoming new folks, and so the impact has been just like any other community that's growing. I think the growth has been a little faster, and so there's been some catch up to help people have the things that they need, have students prepared for school, people to have winter clothes, those sorts of things that we've been supportive with. But we're managing. We're a community that loves each other and takes care of each other, and I think that's overall the sentiment.
That is comforting to hear. I saw a story that with the mayor's plan to take them out of shelters after 60 days is really, aside from the obvious impact, is really impacting kids in school, because then they have to, either find another school or whatever else. That's a difficult thing. Let's talk about education.
Yep.
Mayoral control was renewed for 2 years. The mayor wanted 4 years. I remember from previous times, you said, I believe some of these subject type things should be considered outside the budget. On the other hand, here it was. What are your thoughts?
I didn't love that it happened in the budget, to be frank, and I think there were
That's
many
consistent
people
with
who
what you've said in the past.
I have many colleagues who feel the same. The budget is about numbers, and it's about dollars and cents, and if we're going to have thoughtful, fuller policy conversations, we should allow the space for them. When you're under the gun of a budget that's 3 weeks late and it gets introduced in the last 4 days, you're just not going to have the robust discussion that I think something like this deserves. But
do you like the idea of renewing the mayoral control? I have a follow-up question about this that I'm dying to ask.
Here we go.
And then I'll ask.
Yeah, I think mayoral control allows for an element of accountability that's important. But I do think that there need to be changes, and there will be some made in this newly constituted version. But I don't think that there's enough of a balance. Changes to like the PEP, which is the Panel for Educational Policy, which
they added one member or something like that.
But is that going to be enough to balance the power? Remains to be seen. And I do think that parents and CECs, Community Education Council, should have more decision-making power, should have to be considered more than just advisory.
If I'm just interpreting it, so you could have mayoral control, but with different considerations and kind of moving the authority a little bit more toward parents. My follow-up question was, because I sat in this seat when we had school boards and Carmelo Saez was here, when kind of the emblematic of corruption in school boards, and I did an interview with him many years ago. I would hate to see it go back to that system, but I guess the system that you're talking about, has a different look. In other words, the mayor can still control it, but greater voice to communities and parents.
Right, and here's the thing: we all hear about the errors of school board days. I have to believe that we don't only live in extremes. It can't be the case that only one person's in charge or everyone's in charge and is corrupt. There's a lot between there, and I believe that we can come up with a system where you get to work together, parents have a voice, students have a voice, and you still have accountability in the system.
The school budget was increased $1.3 billion to $35.9. I'm assuming you'll say, fine, bring it on.
We're happy. Any more money to schools, we're always celebrating.
Last time you were here, you talked about the importance of balancing the tax structure, that people making more money should be taxed more. They raise taxes for those making more than $5 million. Should I guess and say you think that didn't go far enough, or at least it's a good start? How do you view that?
I think it's important. I think it's a good start, but I think this is just one piece. We haven't actually balanced our tax structure. So if you made $25 million this year, Gary, you would pay.
If I did.
And you will, I'm sure, right? If you make $25 million this year, you and a person who made $500 million this year would pay the same tax rate. That doesn't seem reasonable. And so I think we still have some of those fundamental structural breakdowns that we have to address. But I think that that's something that we're all coming to understand and appreciate more, and I hope we'll do soon.
The world is changing. We all know how it's changing. I have to tell you, me personally, want to put editorial or commentary on this. I was shocked that there was no more funding for environmental and issues and climate change. That seems to me that would be right up front. And of course, in your communities where there's shorelines over there in Hunts Point and certainly in the Port Morris, the South Bronx, I'm assuming you would want to see funding toward that, or at least consideration for it.
So I think there's at least $500 million for the Environmental Protection Fund. Do you mean that we didn't increase? Is that what you mean?
Yeah, the Superfund Act didn't go through. The New York Heat Act didn't get passed. And again, maybe these are things that need to be negotiated outside the budget. Yeah. But, dollars always help.
Yes. No, and I agree. But we did do funding. There's never a cycle that I think that we would allow where there's no environmental funding. But I agree with you that we could always see more, and we'll keep working on it.
Let's talk about criminal justice.
Yes.
Retail theft took a lot of attention. It got a lot of play nationally and in the media. Well, let me ask you this. I know that many of the drugstores, many of the chain drugstores closed because many of them said we're just inundated. And if you go into a CVS now, everything is locked up. You got to call somebody to open it up and all that kind of stuff. Is this going to help in the response to retail theft? Adding a state police unit, that kind of thing?
I hope so. We're giving it our best effort. I think that when something is illegal, I don't know that because you make it more illegal, people stop doing it. But we'll see. That's the governor's...
Been down the road with the Rockefeller drug laws.
Exactly, and that didn't solve anything. So, I mean, this is the governor's initiative. We'll see how it goes. What I'm really proud of in respect to this space is we were able to create a new tax credit for small businesses, which is really based off of our Bodega pilot program, where we installed cameras and panic buttons and security measures, physical security measures for small businesses that are struggling with it. This tax credit will make it so that if small businesses spend up to $4,000, they'll get a $3,000 tax credit on security upgrades.
Business owners, especially small business owners, are inundated with every issue in the world. Number one, the people that come in the store. Number two, having the inventory. Number three, trying to keep prices down for our communities.
Any number.
If they say, oh, that sounds like a good thing, how do they go about it? They call your office? Do they have to hire an accountant to handle it? What's the way that because I think that information gap is there. And they're like, gee, I didn't know I was due this.
No, that's a really fair point. This would be handled in the normal kind of New York State tax process, but anyone who wants information is certainly welcome to reach out to my office, and we're happy to guide them through the process.
Are you, it didn't come up in this dialogue this time around, but are you satisfied with the bail reform laws? Many people are very concerned, and frankly, you just read a newspaper story of a recidivist of 9 violent crimes is walking down the street punching women in the face, and then he gets arrested. It's like the first 8 crimes didn't keep him in jail. What are your thoughts?
I think we've gone where we're going to go with bail, and I think we should look to other ways in the moment. And one of the ways that I'm really proud of in this budget is we've created a kind of mental health and drug court division pilot program. We're putting $3 million into making it so that folks who are repeat offenders, are considered for treatment instead of just placement in jail. And the truth is, a well person doesn't walk down the street and punch women in the face randomly, right? But that person...
Is that ever true?
Right. And so that person, if we want to actually keep women safe, we need to get that person the help that they need, in addition to making sure that we're able to bring them to justice. And so I think that will actually bring us much further than doing more tweaking to bail laws ever could.
Which leads us somewhat into the dialogue about Rikers. And, the plan was that by 2027 it was going to be closed. And you well know on Concord Avenue, there's a prospective a penal facility coming there. What do you think? Should they because now I've heard people saying, maybe we ought to not close Rikers, of course, improve the conditions there. What are your thoughts, especially because it's your district is directly affected?
I'm a Hunts Pointer, and so my orientation is not to build more jails in communities that already have them, especially in the South Bronx, where our community wasn't consulted at all about the placing of that. It was really just the council and the mayor who got together and made that happen. I think that the number is astronomical, $16 billion to build new prisons, just does not make sense for me when I think of all of the need that exists in our community, and especially because the city historically, this is not a comment on this administration, but just how things work, the city historically makes commitment to close jails and then doesn't meet them. And so what you might end up with is all these new jails and Rikers still open. And so until there's a real plan and commitment and actual timeline that doesn't rely on imaginary money, I feel really uncomfortable.
As you know, I've sat in this seat for many years, and I remember an interview with former Congressman Jose Serrano when they opened the, that's right, you worked in his office. When they opened the Horizon Center right there on 149th Street, he was like, wait a minute, I don't think I want this in the middle of our, you know, the hub, the bustling community in the Bronx. So I guess that fits into what your concept is.
If you even look at the Vernon Bain floating jail, the floating barge was meant to be closed almost 30 years ago and just got closed like a year ago, right? And so it just, jail politics are complicated and they never work out for communities like the South Bronx. We could have a very
long conversation, we're not going to have enough time to do a long conversation about how to deal with lowering the prison population, but it is education and social services.
Investment.
There's a story now going around that the Hoe Avenue Boys and Girls Club is slated to be, that facility is slated to be sold. And I'm like, I just can't think of a wrong direction for the borough of the Bronx to take. We need 5 more Hoe Avenue Boys and Girls Clubs. And that's how we'll address it.
Exactly right. $16 billion.
Again, that's Gary's commentary.
Yeah, no, but I'll take it as mine as well. I think $16 billion into our community would make a big difference.
The cannabis efforts got a new look, and frankly, it seems like it took a long time to finally get the teeth to be able to close illegal sellers.
Yes.
Are they rampant in your district?
We do have, I think just like every part of the city, we've not been spared, but I'm really looking forward to the city being able to jump in and go ahead and close those shops immediately.
I remember seeing one in Kingsbridge that they actually had a sign on the door that said firearms are within this facility or something.
Oh my goodness.
Like,
that's alarming.
It was very alarming. So they closed it down, but then 3 days later it was open again. I was like,
So I think
you think that's not going to happen anymore?
I think, you know, I think it's a new industry and it takes time for things to get their legs under them and to work out the kinks when you're transitioning. But I do think that this passage of this law will make it significantly easier for the city to come in and really regulate some of those
anything
things.
Else in the budget? Because I have a couple of other items. Anything else in the budget that you want to mention that I didn't?
No, I mean, I think this was really comprehensive, actually. That was great. Yeah.
Okay, so we did a good job.
Yeah.
In the past, now you mentioned minimum wage as being important to you. Now, we did get a little bit of a boost. Would you be happier if we did more in this budget?
Of course, of course. I think when you're balancing the state budget, the things to consider are small business owners, are how the economy is doing in the moment, how everything is working together. But I do think that in this moment, still, working people are the ones being squeezed the most. The fact that the phrase working poor exists in itself is kind of an oxymoron. If you're working, why should you be poor? But that's the state of the reality right now. And so I do think I would love to see the minimum wage increase, especially not just in the city, but for our upstate counterparts who don't have the same minimum wage that we do.
When you were first elected to office, and you know, I guess we did the debates and we welcomed you here, we talked a lot about a whole new movement of young Bronx elected officials, largely of color, mostly female. Chantel Jackson, Kenny Burgos, Amanda Farias, who's now the majority leader in the city council, Natalia Fernandez, who went from the Assembly now to the Senate, Althea Gibson. Do you
Althea Stevens,
Althea's, it's funny. I call her,
she replaced Vanessa Gibson. It's tricky.
I do that all the time, but you know, I keep thinking of the great athlete, and I tell her to her face, apologize, Althea. I even wrote in my notes, Althea Gibson. Can you believe it? Althea Stevens. Do you feel that there has been a change or a shift in either priorities or legislation or some of the efforts that are important to you because of this? Or is it still, you're young, you're new, there are many people who've been around a long time. How do you see the shift, or if there is one, in the state legislature?
Yeah, you know, I mean, unfortunately, I think government is slow to change generally. It's how the mechanisms of it all work. But I do think that the changing face of representation of the Bronx is really in tune with the fact that for decades, we've been systemically, historically marginalized, and there has been impact in every single way, and it was completely laid bare during the pandemic. And so all of us are not shy about saying that, and all of us are not shy about saying our community has been at the front line of every single impact that you can name, and it's our time to be at the front of the line for progress.
So it may, I'm just guessing, so it makes it a little easier for you to make that case when you have people in the assembly like Kenny and Chantel, and then Natalia, of course, across the way, who agree with the same thing.
Yep.
One thing I should have asked you in housing, what about the mayor's city of Yes? Are you concerned about that in your community, or do you welcome it? Do you think it will help spur development? We certainly need homes.
Right. I mean, I have a deep trust and respect for Rafael Salamanca, who's my closest city council counterpart, and I overlap with Councilwoman or Deputy Speaker Diana Ayala as well. And I think that the only concern that I have is that projects like these have a longer lifetime than the people who implement them. And so when you end up with new electeds who have different philosophies, things can get off the rails. And so that's my only concern.
I mean, there's a lot of talk about, even the simple question of building new buildings without parking considerations. Boy, try to find a space in any one of our neighborhoods.
Right.
The other thing I have to ask you, which is really off the beaten path, and it's really not in your direct purview.
Yeah.
Should the governor send in the National Guard to college campuses like Columbia and NYU? Like, how do you view the protests?
No, I think that would be an extremely heavy-handed response. I think as a supporter of Israel and as a supporter of Palestinian liberation, I think there's a balance to be struck on this issue. I think it is extremely nuanced, but I do think that the right to protest is fundamental here.
Is there a difference between peaceful protest and two things? One is actually setting up tents on private property. That's a difficult thing. And then, of course, if there's anti-Semitic attacks, and Jewish people don't feel secure going to class, we can't have that either.
100% correct. And I think you do have the right to protest. You don't have the right to protest on private property. I think the National Guard, again, I think that the nature of the news and this moment is that it forces us to think in extremes. But there's a lot of nuance. There's a lot of options in between. And I would love to see the universities figure out how to work it out with their students, how to make sure that all students can feel safe, especially Jewish students who are going through this really difficult moment, but also making sure that we're not doing something as heavy-handed as calling in a paramilitary unit to deal with college students.
One last question as you get ready to get back to Albany after the budget is passed. What's the first thing you want to work on?
Ooh, good question. I'm still in budget mode, but I'm.
Well, I'm the transition here.
Thank you. I'm actually really excited to see what we continue to do to support small businesses, and especially in this moment, all the things that we will continue to do to support reproductive health justice for women here in the state.
Although New York State certainly is a beacon for the rest of the nation on that account.
Yes.
Assemblymember Amanda Septimo, thank you so much for joining us.
Gary.
Maybe we'll have you here before the next budget season.
I love that. We can do some predictions.
Well, we'll talk about some of the things that you're pushing ahead for. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Gary.
Listen, folks, next week we're going to talk about Bronx Week, as well as Bronx economic development with the president of the Bronx EDC. So thanks to our producer, Rebecca Hemick, our director, Will Guzman, our editor is Yenelsida Diaz, and we have a cast of thousands working with us here in the studio, and of course to you, people in the Bronx. So if the curtain don't fall and the creek don't rise, we'll be back next week. Good night.